Hey everyone, I'm Eurogamer's Ian Higton, and oh look, it's that magical time of year again when almost all the big video game releases have gone into hibernation and the release schedule looks about as bare as that crappy old Christmas tree you threw away last week. This is obviously great news to all of you out there who plan to dig into your back catalogues over these next couple of months and finish off all of November's big releases that you just didn't have time to play. But for a well-oiled video team that prides itself on covering all the biggest and best brand new releases in the video gaming calendar, well, we're screwed. Still, I'm someone who likes to look at life with a glass half full attitude, so that's why I'm going to be spending this quiet period looking forward to games I can't wait to play later on in the year. Games like one of my most anticipated titles of the year, Far Cry 6. At the moment, any concrete information is about as rare as a sensible conversation with Herc.
Where's the mashed potatoes at? I'm gonna stick my dick in it.
But hopefully, with a little bit of digging, we'll be able to find enough clues to give us a bit of an idea about what to expect when Far Cry 6 finally releases later this year. Oh crap, did I forget to take my pizza out the oven again? Talking about its release, when it was first announced, Far Cry 6 was scheduled to come out on February the 18th of this year, which is basically about a month away now. Sadly, due to reasons, that date was cancelled and the game was pushed back to the next financial year, aka sometime between April 2021 and March 2022, which is quite a broad date range and so isn't very helpful at all. Thanks, Ubisoft. Never mind though, because silly old Xbox accidentally leaked a potential new release date via a Microsoft Store pre-order listing last November, scheduling the American release for the 25th of May 2021. That date has now been scrubbed from the website after what I presume was a little telling off from Ubisoft, so this date could still be subject to change. But seeing as the Microsoft Store also accidentally but accurately leaked the existence of Star Wars Squadrons, the Mafia trilogy and Crysis Remastered last year, it does stand to reason that this leaked date could be right on the money. Oh, and on the subject of money, anyone who buys the Xbox One or PS4 versions of Far Cry 6 will get a free next-gen upgrade, just like with Watch Dogs Legion and AC Valhalla. Even with the delay, a release date in May is technically quite soon, especially when you factor in the fairly limited promotion that Ubisoft has given the game. Aside from the 2 short pre-rendered videos that came out last year, the company has been pretty quiet about what amounts to be one of their biggest ever franchises. So, like me, you're probably wondering when we're actually going to get to see some proper, legitimate Far Cry 6 gameplay. Well, unfortunately, no one but Ubisoft knows the answer to that right now. The announcement for Far Cry 6 came during Ubisoft's July 2020 Ubisoft Forward event, so it makes sense that we'll hear more about it in a future Ubisoft Forward, but when that will be is a big shrug from me. The last one happened just 2 months after the first Forward, in September 2020, but it completely ignored poor old Far Cry and instead featured news on Watch Dogs Legion, Hyperscape and Rainbow Six Quarantine. So if I were a betting man, I'd say that the next Ubisoft Forward event will be Far Cry-centric AF.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is?
Right, so before I take you through what will be in the game, let's have a quick look at what probably won't be in the game, and that's your boy Vaas here. Now, last year there were some heavy rumours, mainly brought on by Vaas's voice actor Michael Mando himself, that Vaas would be making a return in Far Cry 6. A cheeky comment during a Reddit AMA sent the rumour mills into overdrive, and there were various theories about Vaas's return, one of which I even made a video about. That video investigated the theory that Far Cry 6's Diego was actually a younger version of Vaas, but the conclusion I drew in my video was that that outcome was pretty unlikely. Then, a few months later, this video released. This is the announcement trailer for Far Cry VR Dive into Insanity, an upcoming location-based VR experience that, according to the blurb, will take players back to Far Cry 3's tropical Rook Islands, where they'll be reunited with the maniacal villain Vaas as they work together to explore the islands, fight for their survival, and escape Vaas and his henchmen. In all honesty, this is way more likely to be what Mando was teasing during that Reddit AMA, rather than the complex time-bending origin story that was theorised. It's a shame though, because I'd love to see a proper return for Vaas one day, and I really think the character deserves it. Okay, let's dig into the setting. Far Cry 6 takes place in YARA, a fictional tropical paradise that has been heavily inspired by Cuba. And by inspired by, I mean it actually might as well be Cuba. In an interview with GameSpot, Far Cry 6 narrative director Naveed Kavari stated that he and his team spent about a month in Cuba doing initial research, and if you look at any of the promotional art and videos, it's pretty easy to see the resemblance. The idea of YARA being a location that's almost frozen in time works extremely well with the Cuban aesthetic, which, thanks to the Cuban Revolution and the subsequent embargo set by the US, means that the country is essentially a living museum for classic cars. In Far Cry 6, YARA is currently in the midst of a bloody revolution as a resistance group fights to free the country from the fascistic grip of its brutal dictator Anton Castillo. More on him later. YARA itself has been described as the largest Far Cry playground to date, and it includes many different locations within its borders. We know that there will be jungles, beaches, and run-down rural areas to fight our way through, but the most interesting place to spend your time will undoubtedly be Esperanza, the capital city of YARA and the Far Cry series' very first urban environment. As you can see from these images, the city of Esperanza is full of tall buildings, and this is going to introduce a load of verticality into the standard Far Cry gameplay. In my head, I'm imagining that this will look a bit like Dying Light's parkour in terms of movement around these areas, as you're going to be able to scale buildings, run across rooftops, and use back alleys to avoid pursuers or get the drop on potential mission targets. The exact layout of YARA is still under wraps at the moment, but we do get a sneak peek at the map in this piece of promotional art for the Far Cry 6 Collector's Edition. There's not a huge amount of clues here, but the different colouring on the map suggests that there are 4 separate areas with maybe 4 different factions or boss-type characters to tackle, like in previous games such as Far Cry 5, where each of Montana's 4 areas were ruled by different members of the Seed family. Who those faction leaders will be is still unknown at the moment, but you can pretty much guarantee that they're all featured in this shot of the game's steel case cover from the same collector's edition.
You understand now? Prove it.
The self-proclaimed ruler and legit dictator of YARA, Anton Castillo here, is probably the game's most well-known quantity. So for a little bit of character backstory, who better to listen to than Naveed Kavari?
Anton Castillo is the president of the island of YARA. He actually grew up in the seat of power. So over 50 years ago, his own father was in control of the country. And Anton had to watch his father actually be executed by a revolution that happened on the island. And so that really formed his worldview. It formed how he justifies keeping control on the island.
There are a couple of other little-known details about Anton that we can learn by checking out this Ubisoft-produced cosplay guide though. For instance, we get a very close look at his signature weapon, a golden pistol, embossed with his name and the image of a lion. The lion image is also used for Anton's necktie pendant here, and this image of a lion will undoubtedly be a recurring theme for the character in the game, especially when you factor in the knowledge that the nickname for Yara's capital is the Lion's Den. Finally, we've seen Anton light up a cigar in one of the trailers, but here's a very close look at his tobacco pruner, which tells a very different story to the pistol. This tobacco pruner is old, wooden, and very worn, and it has a kind of flower symbol carved into the handle. It feels to me like this tool will be an important part of Anton's character motivation. Perhaps he had worked in tobacco fields after his father was executed and before Anton reclaimed YARA. Could this be a keepsake from those times for some reason? Maybe it was given to him by a mentor or stolen from someone he murdered in order to escape from the life of labour. Could the flower design be a symbol of one of the game's other factions, perhaps? We don't know for now, of course, but the contrast between the opulence of the gun and the traditional battered tobacco tool seems almost too blatant to be accidental. Next up is Diego, Anton's son and, in Anton's eyes at least, the heir to Yara's presidency. Here's Naveed with more backstory.
Diego Castillo is the son of Anton. He's a 13-year-old teenager trying to sort of figure out his way in the world while also getting these incredibly twisted lessons of how to rule from his father. The idea really was for Diego to be just like any teenager. I think we can all imagine how difficult being a 13-year-old was, figuring out who you are and your place in the world. But now imagine you're doing that while being the son of a dictator. With Diego, we often talked about this idea that he's riding a razor's edge, the idea that you don't really know if he's going to follow in his father's footsteps, and you don't really know if he's going to break free and do his own path, follow his own journey. That conflict, that complexity is really what we're trying to hit with Diego.
There's nothing much else out there to give us any clues as to how Diego will feature in the story, but as Naveed said in that video, there is conflict in his character, so perhaps as players will be able to affect Diego's path with our gameplay choices. Far Cry games normally have good and bad endings, so it stands to reason that perhaps the endings in Far Cry 6 will be driven by the direction in life that Diego decides to take.
What are you doing?
As the protagonist of the game, you'll obviously be playing a central role in the story and the events in YARA, but what do we know about the character you'll be playing? Well, for the first time ever, you'll be playing a character who isn't an outsider to the events of the game. Players will be able to choose between either a male or female version of Dani Rojas, a native to YARA who, for some reason or other, gets introduced to the guerrilla movement against their will. Again, there's not a huge amount of information available about Dani's motivation here, but during interviews, Naveed uses phrases like swept up in the movement, which suggests to me that perhaps Dani's family or even whole village will get wiped out during the opening chapters of the game, leaving them alone and with no other option than heading towards their only course of action, revolution and revenge. Making a return in Far Cry 6 is the series' Fangs for Hire mechanic, which allows you to find and liberate an animal pal, which will then do murders on your command. In Far Cry 6, this mechanic has been renamed, and the Fangs for Hire are now called Amigos. Most of these amigos are still under wraps, but Chorizo, the wheelchair-bound sausage dog here, who I would honestly die for, was obviously far too cute to keep under wraps for long. In an interview posted on Ubisoft's website, Naveed says about Chorizo, the tease for him is that he literally kills with kindness. That's all I'm going to say. Which, at a guess, probably means that Chorizo will play fetch with live grenades and return them to any enemies who are unlucky enough to have thrown one in his direction. The only other amigo to have been shown off so far is Champagne, a white panther that comes as part of a special DLC pack called the Vice Pack, which you can buy separately or get as part of the Far Cry 6 Ultimate Edition. You're going to need a pretty big selection of weapons if you're going to take part in a successful revolution, and as usual with Far Cry games, there looks like there's going to be a huge number to choose from in Far Cry 6. In the trailers and screenshots, we can spot many a standard gun, plus a few explosives like Molotovs and grenades, but it's the signature special weapons that deserve the most amount of time here. Continuing with the theme of comically cobbled together contraptions that we saw in Far Cry 5, the two wackiest weapons we've seen so far are both tied to special editions. The Discos Locos here, which is a spin on Far Cry 5's saw launcher, is a pre-order bonus for the game, and this will allow you to launch sharpened CDs at your enemies to make them dance on their own graves. Shaun of the Dead eat your heart out. Then there's the toaster door flamethrower. This weapon is available to everyone in the main game, but the collector's edition comes with a life-sized model of this funky flamethrower, which suggests it may feature quite prominently in the game. Every Far Cry game has vehicles, and Far Cry 6 will be no different. Except for that it actually kind of will be, because alongside all the normal vehicles you'd expect, like 1950s cars, jeeps and trucks, for the first time in the series, there's also going to be tanks. Ooh, just think of the chaos I could cause in one of those. So far, we've only seen one type of tank in the images, a Soviet T-55A, but hopefully this means we'll be able to drive one as well as fight against them. Chances are high that we'll also see the return of watercraft, what with YARA being an island and all, while helicopters and planes have been confirmed for the game. There have also been some insider leaks that suggest a jetpack might play a big part in the game. This will obviously help with the verticality offered by the buildings of Esperanza, but take that with a pinch of salt because I can't find any official confirmation on a jetpack at this point. Oh, and of course we'll also be able to ride nature's vehicles, aka horses, in Far Cry 6, which you'll also be able to shoot from as you ride. This is the only rideable mount announced so far, but in Far Cry 4 you could ride and shoot from elephants as well, so perhaps there will be a couple more unique options available in 6. And finally, there have been no real details yet about co-op or PvP multiplayer, or the inclusion of a map editor, but according to some pre-order listings, like the one on the Microsoft Store, there is mention of online multiplayer. So if we go by previous Far Cry titles, it's a good bet that online co-op at least will be a thing. It would be nice to see the return of PvP multiplayer and the map editor, but with a bigger single-player game this time around, and the speed at which the number of players have dropped off from previous Far Cry multiplayer lobbies, I wouldn't be surprised if Ubisoft finally decides to leave that portion out. And there we go, that is everything we know about Far Cry 6 at the moment, with a few guesses thrown in here and there for good measure, of course. I'm positive that we'll hear more about Far Cry 6 soon, especially seeing as that leaked release date isn't that far away at all. So do subscribe to Eurogamer for all your Far Cry facts, and I'll get them to you as soon as I hear any. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a like and perhaps check out some of our other Far Cry videos, some of which are on screen and clickable right now. We've done loads of them. There's loads. You got loads of choice to keep you entertained. Anyway, I better go and find my fire extinguisher because this pizza fire doesn't look like it's gone down at all. In fact, by the smells of things, I think it's got even worse.